Okay, it's a big day at Red Door Recovery HQ today. We're honoured to be having a chat today with Johann Hari, who is famous for his splendid book, which I would recommend to absolutely everyone, Chasing the Scream, which has probably provoked more discussion and debate in a healthy way here in New Zealand than anything, and globally, I imagine, than anything else that has been published. So well done, Johann. It's been an amazing ride, I'm sure.
Oh, thanks so much. Actually, I have my uncle Johnny. It lives in New Zealand. He's lived there for about 40 years. So I've been looking for an excuse to come and visit him for ages. So hopefully next time I go to Australia, I'm going to come over to New Zealand. So yeah, I'm really. I've got a cousin who lives there, and my he's had a baby that I really want to see. He's named after our mutual grandmother, who I was very close to. So yeah, I'm really, really excited to talk with you, and I've been really excited to hear from people in New Zealand. It's been really fascinating to hear from people who've engaged with the book, and I'm really interested in the New Zealand drug debate generally, partly because of the experiment you guys nearly had with regulating legal highs or new psychoactive substances. So yeah, I'm super excited to talk to you about anything you guys want to talk about.
Well, definitely let us know if you're coming over. Where's your uncle, did you say?
Yeah.
Whereabouts is he based?
He's in Auckland. He's a hairdresser. Some of your viewers might know him. John McRae, his name is.
So okay. Everyone in Auckland's a hairdresser.
I should warn your listeners that I'm insanely jet lagged. I'm back in Britain briefly, and I'm drugging myself with massive amounts of caffeine, as you can see. So, but I will do my best to be coherent.
All right. Well, it's the middle of the night for me over here, so we're sort of on a par. So what's next on the to-do list was the first question to come from our group.
Oh, what you mean? What am I working on?
Yes.
Well, there's a few things that I'm not allowed to talk about, but I'm writing a book that is, I'm just finishing a book that is a little bit related to the subject of Chasing the Scream, but not really. I think takes some of the things in it and goes in a very different direction, or explores a very different direction. But I'm not really allowed to talk about it. I'm kind of itching to, but I've been ordered by my agent not to. So I'm working on a few different books, because the expensive bit of the work that I do is really the travel, so I try to combine researching a few books at the same time. So I'm working on a few books, but I'm not really allowed to go into any detail with them. I'm sorry, I feel...
No, that's cool. That's cool.
I will have a very exciting announcement quite soon about something else, though, so... but annoyingly, I'm not allowed to say just yet, so sorry.
Okay, well, we've got a few questions here from members of our Red Door Recovery group. As I said earlier, I think don't shoot the questioner.
Right.
Number one on their list is...
I cannot imagine the range of things I've been asked in the time that I've been talking about this book, so believe me, nothing... Okay. There is nothing that they can ask me that will perturb me.
Okay, well, I quite like this first question. It's regarding the chap who murdered Billie Holiday, essentially. And the question is, if you had a time machine and could go back, what is the one thing you would say to Harry Anslinger?
Oh, that is such a question. Okay, when I interview people, I often ask time travel questions, because you always get something interesting. And now I realise what a bastard I've been whenever I've done that, because this is super difficult. Can I tell you another thing just before I answer that, which is related, which is that when I interviewed Yolanda Bavan, who was a friend of Billie Holiday's, brilliant jazz singer in her own right, I asked her that question. I said, if you could go back in time and you could talk to... She had just been telling me about how late in her life, Billie Holiday, when this guy, Harry Anslinger, is destroying her, how Billie Holiday thought that she'd be completely forgotten, that no one would remember her. And I said to Yolanda later, if you could go back in time and talk to Billie Holiday, what would you say? And Yolanda said, Billie, baby, this morning I went into Whole Foods and they were playing your songs. Nobody forgot you.
Wow.
And that really stayed with me. I should have used it in the book, actually. I took it out for space reasons. I think the thing I'd say, it kind of goes to a wider argument right about with Anslinger and about generally with prohibitionists, because I think I have met someone who is basically Harry Anslinger, who I write about in the book, Sheriff Joe Arpaio.
Oh, yes.
It's actually he's at the moment because he's a big supporter of Trump, and it looks like Hillary might, in his state, Arizona, it looks like Hillary might even win there now. Please God. And Um, you know, I don't want to be. I think what Harry Anslinger did was unimaginably terrible, and I think what Joe Arpaio does. He's the sheriff who runs that prison where they make people with addiction problems go out on chain gangs wearing T-shirts saying "I was a drug addict" and force them to dig graves while members of the public mock them and jeer at them. And it's one of the worst things I've ever seen in my life. And of course, it exposes the madness of the war on drugs. The idea that that will make people stop being addicted is so insane. And of course, getting to know the women on the chain gang and interviewing them over several days, realizing how brave and dignified they were in those circumstances was really moving to me. But so the reason why I think of that is because Arpaio was Harry Anslinger's personal kind of disciple, but also, I don't think you can. What's the right way to say this? One of the things I realized is I used to write newspaper columns, and one of the things I used to do in those columns was kind of rage against bad people, right? And one of the things I learned, I think, is not just that that's futile, but actually that it's wrong. Even people who do really bad things, and Harry Anslinger and Joe Arpaio do terrible things, are in themselves broken and damaged. And I don't think the solution is to rage at them. Now, sometimes people need to be stopped from doing what they're doing. Donald Trump needs to be stopped from being president. Joe Arpaio needs to stop from being the sheriff of Maricopa County. I wish someone had stopped Harry Anslinger. I'm not saying that, I'm not just kind of hippie-ish, let it be. Sometimes people have to be stopped. But, as I got to interview Joe Arpaio, he actually didn't talk about this, but I knew, his mother was a kind of hardline Catholic. They were Italian immigrants. And she had, I think I remember the details right, 8 children. Joe is the 8th. And when she was pregnant with him, she was told that if she didn't have an abortion, she'd die. And she didn't have an abortion and she did die, giving birth to him. And apparently he was told the whole time during his childhood that he had killed their mother, right, by his siblings and by his dad. And when you know that, of course, it doesn't excuse him for a moment any of the vicious acts Joe Arpaio carries out. But you just think, okay, so this is just another broken person. And I don't want to replicate the war on drugs with a kind of war on prohibitionists where I say that they're evil and they're disgusting, and I kind of mirror the things that they say about drug users and people with addiction problems and kind of just go, well, they say our people are evil, let's say their people are evil. And it kind of, what I would want to do with Harry Anslinger would be to, and I don't think this would be possible, but I would want to be the kind of person who could try to do this. And I don't think I am, but I'd want to, would be to try to break the kind of chain of hatred and try to say to him, I wouldn't want to rage at him and I wouldn't want to argue with him. There's no point. This man had no relationship with evidence, right? I quote in the book one of my favourite quotes about the war on drugs where he said, someone challenged him and he said, I've made up my mind, don't try to confuse me with the facts, right? Which could be the motto for the entire war on drugs. I wouldn't want to argue with him about facts because he doesn't even care about facts. What I would want to say was, you're obviously in a lot of pain and I would like to understand that, and you're a human who deserves compassion. And I think if you were able to engage with your pain and your distress, you probably wouldn't be so cruel. And you wouldn't want to do such vicious and cruel things. I don't know if I would be able to do that. I'd probably want to punch him in the face. But, I hope I'd be able to do that.
Yeah, my answer is probably a bit briefer. It's 2 words. But okay, we watched the decriminalisation in Portugal, which I think was 2001, with interest. And there's I sort of need the answer to this as well. I kind of understand how that environment kind of took the stress out of the scene. If I get busted, what's the worst that's going to happen? I'm going to be offered some rehab, perhaps. What I don't completely understand is what people are still doing drugs. The dealers were still dealing drugs. Why do you feel that we had a drop in the likes of violence, the number of ODs, and I think after 3 years, a steady drop in overall use of drugs, simply through decriminalisation?
So there's a couple of things there. it's important to distinguish drug use and drug addiction. So 90% of drug use is not addictive use, as we all know that with alcohol. Most people in your nearest pub in New Zealand are not going to be alcoholics, and the vast majority of people who use any drug are not addicted, which is kind of surprising to me, but the evidence is really clear on that. But I think it's worth understanding with Portugal why there was the success they had. And the decriminalisation is an important part, but it's only one part of a bigger picture. And I think it's really worth explaining this. So in the year 2000, Portugal had one of the worst drug problems in Europe. 1% of the population was addicted to heroin. And every year they tried the drug war more, they arrested and imprisoned more people. Every year the problem got worse. And that was when the Prime Minister, Jose Socrates, and the leader of the opposition kind of got together and said this really radical thing, this thing no one had said since drugs were first banned 100 years before. They said, should we get some scientists to look at the evidence, right? So they got this panel, they put together this panel led by this amazing man I got to know called Dr. João Goulão, and they basically said, you guys go and figure out what would solve this, and we've agreed in advance we'll do whatever you recommend. So it kind of took it out of politics. And when the panel came back, having looked at all the best evidence, it was a couple of years they took to investigate it. What they said was decriminalise all drugs, from cannabis to crack, all of them. But, and this is the crucial next step, take all the money we currently spend on screwing people's lives up and spend it instead on turning their lives around. And this, I think, is the most crucial part of the picture, because so you think about what we do now, right? We shame, stigmatise and punish drug users and addicts. We give them criminal records, which makes it really hard for them to get jobs. And we put barriers between them and reconnecting with the society. What Portugal did was the exact opposite. They set up a huge program of, I'll give you two examples. It's interesting because it's not really what we think of as drug treatment in most of the world. There was a bit of residential rehab, there was some psychological support, those things are valuable. But the single biggest thing they did was a huge program of job creation. If you used to be a mechanic, they'd go to a garage and they'd say, if you employ this guy for a year, we'll pay half his wages. They set up a big program of microloans so that addicts, people with addiction problems, could set up and run small businesses about things they cared about and get support. So the goal was to say to every person with an addiction problem in Portugal, we love you, we value you, we're on your side, we want you to have a good life. And I think that is the core of it. You know, Bruce Alexander, who did the Rat Park experiment, said to me once, you know, we talk all the time about individual recovery and addiction, and that has real value, but we need to talk much more about social recovery. You know, what's gone wrong with us is not just going wrong as individuals, but it's going wrong as a society and as a culture and as a group. And you see that, and I think it really helps if you see addiction as part of a continuum with all sorts of other behaviours that are going on. So, for example, I just got back today from Cleveland in Ohio. You know, but okay, that's an extreme example. But think about the US generally. I don't know the stats for New Zealand, but 1 in 4 middle-aged women in the United States are taking antidepressants at any given time. 1 in 10 teenage boys is being given a really powerful stimulant drug because they don't want to focus on what's around them. For the first time since the Civil War in the United States, white male life expectancy is falling, and that's largely because of addiction and suicide, right? So these things all come together. They're not happening because individual people are individually flawed. Of course, everyone has flaws. These things are happening largely because of social changes that are making a lot of us feel really terrible and a lot of people just feel bad. And so I think if we see it in that context, what you understand in Portugal, and why there were many reasons why there was a fall in the problems associated with drug use. And it's worth saying drug use did not fall. And it's important to say that. Overall drug use very slightly rose by about 6%. But drug addiction fell massively, overdose fell massively, street crime fell massively, HIV transmission among addicts fell massively. So it's a combination of things. Some of it is kind of technical fixes, which are really important. Things like needle exchanges, they obviously put more money into that. Methadone prescription, they put more money into that. I think they should have done heroin prescription, but that's another debate. So some of it was, you know, those technical things that you can do that prevent people dying. That was a big part of the picture, but an even bigger part of the picture was social recovery. The cage that people with addiction problems lived in changed. And that's why, I think it's the main reason, that's why most people think the main reason there was such a significant improvement in Portugal. Does that answer the question? Does that make sense?
It does. It makes a lot of sense. And to take it a step further, and I'm going to reference the Wirral. I was talking to a detective earlier this week, just regarding some criminal charges one of our clients is facing, and sort of, we had a good conversation. It's not always good, there are good and bad cops everywhere, I guess. This guy was pretty good, and we had a good talk about the concept of addiction being a mental health issue, not a crime in itself. And we have a pretty big meth problem here in New Zealand. It'd be fair to say that at least 60% of our clients would be meth related. And I said, well, and he said, how do we get rid of it? And I said, well, we could try legalising everything. And of course, I initially got that initial look as if I was completely insane. And then I told him about the Wirral, and I said, just what if we were to legalise cannabis and perhaps follow the model that they've set in America? It'd be great for the Northland economy. We've probably got some very good growers up there. And then perhaps legalise by prescription an opiate, MDMA, or ecstasy, and cocaine perhaps. That will probably get rid of your meth for you. It'll also get rid of a whole lot of other issues, all the money that's going into the people dealing this stuff, and it's a big money industry, as you know. And he started to sort of come around, and it ended up, the look changed from being you're a complete nutter to actually there's a wee bit of, that makes a little bit of common sense, and it's hard to find a problem with that concept. Clean, cheap, managed doses. At the moment, we're getting, Flaka has just arrived in New Zealand. Oh God, can't wait. It's being sold as ecstasy, so we've got a long weekend coming up. You can imagine what's going to happen this weekend. It's so predictable. Do you know much about that drug at all?
No, tell me more. Tell me more about it.
Well, Flaka is the what they're calling the zombie drug at the moment. It's kind of a amphetamine based, but supercharged. And if you go over the limit with it, it reminds me a bit of a fad we had here in the 70s with a plant called Datura. It's just massively. People are running in front of cars and walking through windows if they ID on it. In the Gold Coast in Queensland last weekend, 14 people were hospitalised. It's just an evil synthetic derivative. It's supercharged meth, really. It's the big brother of, or the offspring of a drug previously known as bath salts in this part of the world. Not a good.
Oh, right, about the bath salts. Yeah, okay, I can talk a bit about that. But so go on.
Well, that's it, really. It's sort of your thoughts on that. Well, going back to the original question, I kind of deviated a bit, and there'll be some heavy editing here, I imagine. But the concept of legislation, I support it. I can't really fault it.
I think there's so many things in what you just asked. Just out of curiosity, what kind of reaction do you get in the recovery community in New Zealand when you talk about these issues?
Almost, I'd say close to 100% supportive on that issue when you talk it through.
That's really interesting because obviously there's been there's a division within the recovery community, and I'm so pleased to hear that. I've got lots of thoughts about what you just said, but I think it's worth looking at. I was in Australia when they were at the height of the ridiculous, one of the most antediluvian debates I've come across about ice or methamphetamine or crystal meth, where it's a sign of how removed the drug debate has become from reality, that you can have the Prime Minister at the time, Tony Abbott, and the Australian police stating officially that if you use crystal meth, ice, you gain, these were the words they used, superhuman strength, right? You only have to explain to if we had a drug that made human beings superhuman, that would have an awful lot of application. Like, it's such an absurd, right? Most 10-year-olds would understand you cannot make humans superhuman, right? You cannot give humans the qualities of Dr. Octopus or Spider-Man, right, with a drug. If such a thing existed, it would actually be a very useful drug in all sorts of ways. So we have this weird debate where you can, and you see this skip from drug to drug, right? So a new drug is invented and all sorts of heightened claims are made about it. And then enough people have used the drug that you see are actually a tiny, usually what happens is any drug, there's a small minority who can react in terrible ways to it, right? Everyone watching this will know someone who behaved appallingly when they drank alcohol, right? Doesn't mean that's what alcohol does to you. It's what alcohol does to a tiny number of the people who use it. If you think about the heightened claims that made about cannabis, now I know a bit about. I don't know anything about the use of bath salts in New Zealand, but I do know that there were similar claims about bath salts and there are certainly lots of problems with bath salts. If anyone's asking my advice, I would recommend don't use them. Right? This is not a pro bath salts. I'm obviously not making a pro bath salts argument, but so there was a famous case that kind of launched bath salts into the kind of consciousness of Americans, where a guy, I'm trying to remember the details, a homeless guy in Florida bites someone's face off, right? And it was a terrible case, and I think if I remember rightly, he just randomly attacked someone in the street and literally bit his face off. And this was reported as like, this is what bath salts do to you. This is what will happen if you use bath salts. Goes all over the US. A couple of weeks later, the autopsy results come in. The guy hadn't even used bath salts. The only drug he'd used was cannabis, right? So we have to be very wary of claims. There are plenty of problems with plenty of drugs, right? There's plenty of problems with alcohol. But this idea that there are drugs uniquely evil and uniquely make people deranged, this is always claimed and it always falls apart. Now, that may be a drug that harms some people in terrible ways, right? I'm not disputing that. But I'm very skeptical. Well, it turned out to not be the case when these claims were made in the US. Which is not to say that there will not be real people who've had real terrible experiences with that drug. The danger is generalizing that to say this is what it does to everyone. And that was 90% of people who use. Again, I would urge people not to use methamphetamine if they're asking me. It's bad for your heart. If you consume it through crystal meth, it's bad for your lungs. It can induce psychosis, but 90% of people who use crystal meth even don't become addicted. Evidence for that is very clear. It used to be given out as a diet drug, right? I mean, loads of people in the 50s took it. So I think that, but in terms of the wider point you're making about legalization, I think you're totally right. And it's important to explain to people, legalization means different things for different drugs, right? Legalization is not, sometimes when you say you want to legalize all drugs, people think you mean, someone can go into their local liquor store and buy crack, right? That's not, maybe there's some kind of really hardcore libertarian out there, but very few people are proposing that, right? What most people, and the other thing to say about legalization is that it's not abstract, right? This has been tried, and it means different things for different drugs. So cannabis, we legalize like alcohol. I would say ecstasy, we could legalize like alcohol, or perhaps like absinthe, some of the harder forms of alcohol. But Switzerland has legalized heroin, for example. And again, the results are very clear. We can see them. Literally nobody has died of an overdose on legal heroin. Right? I've been there. I've seen it. I've looked at all the scientific studies. The program has been in place for more than 10 years now, and nobody has died of an overdose on legal heroin. Right? Now, that's partly because you're given a legal place to use it where you can be watched by nurses. It's partly because you don't get a contaminated, shitty product because you're getting it from a legal source, not from a dealer. I think the main element, those two are important, but the main element is that when you get into the program, they give you support to turn your life around. And you don't want to use heroin anymore if your life becomes good. You don't want to be addicted to heroin. You cease to be addicted if your life is good, and you have meaning and purpose and you feel engaged with the world and you want to be present. And that's very much the Swiss experience. So I think that the key thing to say to guys like that police officer is not, because if you just say it in the abstract, it can just sound weird or mad, right?
It does.
But if you say, well, loads of people also thought it was weird and mad in Portugal, then they tried it. This is what happened. Loads of people thought it was weird and mad in Switzerland. Then they tried it. This is what happened. Switzerland is a super conservative country. My dad's from there. My grandmother got the vote in 1973, right? This is not San Francisco. And yet they voted to keep heroin legal once they'd seen it in practice by a massive margin in a referendum. 70% of super conservative Swiss people voted to keep heroin legal once they'd seen it in practice, just because the results, when you see the alternatives in practice, it's important to say it's not a kind of magical solution. You still have plenty of problems, but the problem is really significantly reduced. You know, no deaths from overdose on legal heroin is a pretty striking figure, right? And that's not a coincidence. So I think it's about explaining those things to people. But actually, weirdly, I find police officers, they're either the worst on this subject or the best on this subject. Partly because if you're a police officer, just keep your fucking eyes open. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't swear. Just keep your eyes open, right? Just look. If you're a police officer, you see the failure of these policies probably more vividly than anyone other than people with addiction problems and drug users themselves.
I'm just making a little mental note. I've got to find a way to get you to talk to a couple of politicians when you're over here. I'll do whatever it takes. It just makes such common sense to me.
Well, I really encourage it. Like, I'd be interested to know about this from you. That, you know, I was really encouraged by the evidence that New Zealand was going to try this regulatory program for new psychoactive substances. What went wrong? What happened? Why did that?
The problem was the nature of the substances. Really, synthetic cannabis was a terrible, terrible mistake. I mean, it was, for some people, at least as bad as methamphetamine. It was just a horror story. It won't go down as one of our greatest moments. It was an experiment that went really badly.
This might be a really stupid question, but why do people want synthetic cannabis when you can just get cannabis?
Well, you can't. It can be quite. I mean, I could make a phone call now and have methamphetamine here in 10 minutes, but getting cannabis, it could be, 2 days waiting.
Why is that? Is it just because of the geography of New Zealand and it's so far from? Why is that?
Well, I think it's a seasonal thing.
Huh.
I don't know. It's a really good question. Maybe it's a really good question. Thanks for putting me on the spot like that. There is a season. There is a seasonal thing, but I think
maybe that no one knows, or there may be some kind of experts who do know. But that's really interesting. The
money's in the meth. I mean, there's probably got a lot. I've got a question here from Mel, who wants to marry you. That was her first question, but I said that's probably not possible. And this is
my R revealed. It would not be a fulfilling marriage for Mel, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Unless it's Mel Gibson, in which case,
nah.
If you were the anti-Semitism,
you can do better than that.
I would consider it.
Her question is, on your travels researching Chasing the Screen, what was the single most impactful event or discovery you made? I think I might know the answer to this. We'll find out. Tough one. Tough question.
There were so many, and I feel like it disrespects a horror of some of the other people if I choose horror of some of the other things. I think the thing that most moved me was the alternatives in practice. I think it was one of the people I interviewed. I think he thought I was mad. Actually, when I in Portugal, I went into with this guy called João Figueira, who was the top drug cop in Portugal at the time of the decriminalisation, and he led the campaign against it. And he said, it would be a complete disaster that, you'd have a massive explosion in drug use and addiction and teenage drug use and all sorts of things. And when I went to see him, he said to me, everything I said would happen didn't happen, and everything the other side said would happen did. And he talks about how amazing the decriminalisation had been and how ashamed he was of how badly he got it wrong before. And I really choked up. And I think, because I guess after seeing all this horror, just see, that is actually just, and not just seeing it in the world, but seeing it in my own family. And then to just see, there's actually this quite simple thing that we could have done all along, that actually people did before the drug war began 100 years ago, that works pretty well. It's not perfect, it's not a magic bullet, but really massively changes the situation of people with addiction problems. that was really moving to me. And then to go to the heroin clinic in Switzerland, I don't remember the order in which I did them. I think I went to Portugal first. Then to go to Vancouver, where there had been this incredible uprising, and to go to Uruguay, where President Mujica led this incredible campaign, and he was such an amazing person. I think obviously there were things that were devastating in northern Mexico, but I think the to see how well the alternative worked really, that was really profoundly moving, and to meet people who would have died if they had lived in Arizona or Vietnam or Britain, and to see them having good lives. Ruth Dreyfus, the president of Switzerland, the woman who led the campaign to legalise heroin, she's one of the most amazing people I've ever met. She had this moment she told me about that really moved her. They'd set up the legal heroin clinics, and I think she was about to end her time as president, and she went to see one of the clinics in Geneva, I think it was, and a guy kind of came up to her, handed her a note, and just ran off. And the note, when she went back to the office, she opened the note, and the guy said, I used to be a homeless street addict. I thought I was going to die. And then I came to this clinic, and they gave me all this support, and they turned my life around. And he said, now I've got a job. Actually, I work in your office. If you walk out of your office and, walk down 5 desks, you'll see me. And she said that symbolized to her the change that happened. That really moved me, to think about that, and to meet Ruth and meet all the other people with addiction problems in Switzerland who were being helped, not shamed and punished. Yeah.
Next question is from Henry. How do you think the war would have gone if Hitler hadn't have been on the crack?
There's this new book that I've got somewhere, I think, packed in my bag. This is this book about drugs in the third. We kind of knew a bit of this before. It's in the Ian Kershaw biography of Hitler, I think. But it turns out Nazis, total drug fiends. I'm a bit conflicted about this. It's a bit like every now and then someone writes a book saying Hitler was gay, and I always kind of think, not really who we want on our side, is it? But it's a bit of a mixed bag, that, isn't it? Because you can imagine the people who want to demonise people with addiction problems, kind of waving around Hitler as the new poster boy. I don't know. I don't know if I want to read the book. Apparently, it's very good. I've heard several people I know read it, so it's very good. It's by a German guy whose name I can't remember. It's still packed away in my bag. Well, there were some really good people who would take it. Actually, one of the things they were giving was what's it called? A very potent amphetamine, like methamphetamine. They gave it a name. I can't remember. One of the people who took it was one of my favourite German writers, Heinrich Böll. And he was a really great and humane and lovely man. So I don't know enough about it. I'd be interested to know, I don't know if it's in the book, if people think it actually made them more efficient in the war, or if it actually... I don't know. It happened on our side too. We used to give radar, not with meth, but they used to give amphetamine to people who did radar stuff because it was so boring and you needed to be able to focus. So I don't know. Once I've read the book, I'll get back to you, Henry.
Gosh, air traffic controllers on the meth. I'm not sure. Not sure about that. This next question is from Tara. She's connected to two people, a heterosexual couple whose relationship through the use of meth has become incredibly toxic, at times violent, but they sort of need each other for the same reason, so that they can sit around on the pipe. But then when, of course, they're coming off the pipe for a day or two on the come down, it just turns incredibly toxic. And she's trying to help. She just doesn't know what to do or what to advise them. But together they're bad. Should they be looking at time apart?
I get a lot of people, understandably, asking me for advice on very specific personal situations, and I just don't feel I can. I don't feel like, even when you know people really well, I find it very hard to give advice or be confident that you're right. So the honest answer is I have no idea. I can talk about, I mean, if I think about people I've known, you know, you can develop. There's a concept I think is really problematic and dangerous. My friend Maya Sazalovitz writes about this very well. Is the concept of codependency. Stanton Peele writes about it very well as well. Some guys watching this might know his work. It's a really dangerous concept because what it does, so it is perfectly possible to develop toxic and harmful relationships with people who have addiction problems. It's possible to develop toxic and harmful relationships with people who have no addiction problems. And my worry is part of the way this concept of codependency is used. So it's true. There are people who sometimes develop such toxic relationships that you would advise them to end that relationship. But in some of the treatment world in the US, and to a lesser but still degree in the United Kingdom, I don't know enough about New Zealand, there's a kind of reflex reference to any relationship that people have had with someone with an addiction problem as codependent, and therefore it's stigmatized, and therefore they advise the people to sever the relationship. There's also this concept of enabling. Now, you can, of course, people in a relationship with someone with addiction problems can help them in ways that actually isn't helpful, of course. Again, just like we all know people who help someone else who didn't have an addiction problem and it screwed them up in one way or another, right? It's not unique to addiction. I think both of those concepts are used in really dangerous and pernicious ways, which is not to say there are not some instances of those things really happening, but actually enabling So I guess what I would say is what we know is the best path out of addiction is connection, human connection and meaning. And so urging people to sever their connections just reflexively as the first step seems to me like a very bad and unscientific piece of advice. So I know people who've been to rehab centres who were told you mustn't have a romantic relationship for 2 years after getting out of your first 2 years of sobriety, for example. That's insane advice. It's completely insane. There's no evidence for that. It's a terrible thing to tell someone. Actually, all the evidence is that people who do have strong bonds and connections are much more likely to get better and to be able to get back to having a good life. So, although I can't comment on these specific cases, I don't know. It may well be that they are destroying each other. It may well be, I would say generally the advice that's given to reflexively say, well, they're codependent, they're destructive, they're enabling, they need to stop. I'm very, very suspicious of that way of thinking, but I don't know enough about these individuals to say if that applies to them or not.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to get them into our program, but unless they want to, there's really not much point. So I think in terms of severing the relationship, my advice would be to think about severing the relationship with meth initially.
Do you have to be abstinent to enter your program?
At the moment, we don't manage detox, so we ask that people have detoxed for 5 days with methamphetamine, and if they're a serious alcoholic, then we do recommend a managed detox in a unit or through a GP. So yeah, generally they're in terms of detoxification, they're at that point when they start the program.
Right. I see.
We're at a very small sort of beginning stage. We've got a three stage program, and one day we would like to be able to work in that area as well. The program we run at Red Door Recovery is a kind of a blend. We're not 12 steps. We're not religious. It's certainly not right for everybody. It's a blend of addiction counselling about the problem, but also a lot of life and wellness coaching. So, what shape is your life able to take when you get rid of this obstacle in your life? But you can sit around and counsel and coach people all day. We'd all go mad. So the third part is kind of external activities, and they've got nothing to do with it. It's more inspired by. Have you heard of Phoenix Multisport? in
Yeah,
America?
I've been to some of them. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of inspired by that. So we kind of tailor activities. It can be at one end of the scale, it might be horse whispering, equine therapy, float tanks, meditation. At the other end of the scale, if we've got somebody who's mechanically inclined, we'll organise a couple of days in a car workshop for them. So it's about finding what we call the replacement passion. What are we going to do when we're not sitting around in a car smoking the pipe for 8 hours? Well, how are we going to fill that time? I'll tell you
Yeah.
something else that's happened too, and I looked at our intake from 6 months ago. These are roughly 50% meth and alcohol, and our intake from 3 months ago, and 100% clean. Now, relapse is a reality. It's an awfully difficult thing to discuss with clients, really. Some programs will say, well, it's going to happen, it's fine. It's not the end of the world, and it isn't. I've seen it work as, it kind of becomes the fuel, the kick in the ass people give themselves to have their sort of forever recovery. Have you got any message? I'm pretty, to get to 6 months 100% clean is pretty good, but we're targeting realistically 80% after 12 months, and 75% would be probably the reality at 3 years. That would be that's at the sort of top end, which would be a dream come true if we achieve it. We haven't been going for 3 years, so we don't know yet. But have you got a message for our graduates? They all go into an ongoing support long term with peer and professional support through the graduates group. But have you got a message for them?
Well, I would say congratulations, definitely, and I know from people close to me how hard that journey is, and I think you're right that it's right that a key part of the program is finding a kind of alternative passion, and I guess one of the key things is about just treating yourself with compassion. One of the things that I've found a bit disturbing in the time that I've been going around talking about chasing the scream is how much internalized stigma there is among in the recovery community. So I'll give you an extreme example, and this is an extreme example, but God knows I've lost track of time now, but 4 months ago, maybe 5 months ago, I was on a panel here in London, actually, with a super right-wing British politician called Ian Duncan Smith. He's disgusting on these issues, disgusting. And on the panel was also a kind of addict in recovery. She'd been in, she was like 20 years since she had last used a drug. And she was massively supporting this right-wing politician and the drug war. And she said, she described herself as having been evil when she had been a using addict. She said, I was evil. And I found it very disturbing. I've come across this every now and then. It's a minority phenomenon among the recovery community, definitely. Everywhere, even in really severe places I've been. Apart from Vietnam, I would say it was the minority everywhere. But I found that really distressing. And I see so much, internalized stigma, internalized hatred, and and I think I just think it's terribly sad, and I think so much of the work of recovery is, partly the work of exactly as you identified, totally rightly, finding meaning and purpose. So you want to be present, and that involves all of us giving social support and helping. But I think also it's about helping the person who has had an addiction problem to construct a story about their life where they understand how they came to be so distressed, that they wanted to be heavily anaesthetized. And that should be a loving story, a compassionate story where we understand that that drug was and not a kind of evil law, old and internalized.
Johann, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. If anyone watching this wants to email me any further questions or anything, they're totally free. It's chasingthescream@gmail.com. And thank you all so much for the work you're doing. And you guys should be really proud of the work you're doing. You know, I've seen in so many places how beginning the work of undoing that kind of stigma and hatred and breaking the taboos like you were doing with that police officer, David, you know, that begins the job, right? And things are changing really quickly. You know, attitudes are changing really fast. You know, these things can fall like that. It's a hollow policy, the war on drugs, right? It's very hard to find people who even defend it. And it's worth thinking about. I'll just give you one example, because obviously we're all thinking about the American election at the moment. When Bill Clinton left office, not that long ago, well, everyone watching this, I'm sure, will remember when Bill Clinton was president. If not, you're too young, go and should be watching this anyway. You know, when Bill Clinton became president, 15% of Americans, 15% of Americans believed in legalizing cannabis. When Hillary Clinton becomes president in January, unless Armageddon happens, then 60% of Americans will at that point be in favor of legalizing cannabis, right? That's a huge shift, 15% to 60%. And that's not so long. That's 16 years, right? So you can have I've lived through a really big change. I'm gay. I was recently speaking to a young gay person who's only 16, and I actually showed him some of the things that were like front page. When I was a kid, extreme homophobia was just normal on the front page of newspapers when I was 16. Now I'm not that old, right? I'm 37. So you think about that change in 21 years. He literally could not believe these headlines. He was like, did people phone the police? Right? It was just like incredulous. So we've all lived through big changes like that, right? Everyone watching this will have lived through that transformation in the attitudes towards gay people. Things that were totally normal to say 20 years ago now are very unusual when you hear them. We can have a comparable change. There's already been a big change towards people with addiction problems. I'll give you a really stupid lowbrow thing to end with. I recently watched an episode of Starsky and Hutch because I couldn't sleep. And there was a kind of character in it, some people might not remember, it was an 80s cop show. And there was a character in it who was kind of evil, and you knew they were evil because they had an addiction problem. That was the sign that they were evil. You would not get that now in any TV show, right? You would not get any kind of evil addict character because the culture has changed so much, right? That now would not be acceptable. People would be really puzzled. They would be angered. So the culture is changing a lot. We've still got a long way to go, but we're moving in the right direction. And every day that we fight more is a day we get closer to getting to where they've got in Portugal and Switzerland, you know, and every day we don't do that, more people die. And so the choice is really up to us, and we really can win this one.
I think you should feel pretty good about yourself. What you're doing is important. It matters. I think on a personal level, you've changed my thinking, and I think a lot of you comes out from me when we do particularly when our introduction, when each client intake comes along. So thank you for that. Can't wait to. I buy copies of. Check the sales figures of Chasing the Scream down here, because I just buy copies and I thrust them at people and say, you have to read this. And even if they say, look, I've got nothing to do with this world, and I said, it doesn't matter, you have to read it. Then, of course, and on the chain goes. So just amazing what you're doing. I can't wait to see what happens next. Waiting with bated breath. Please feel welcome to join the Red Door Recovery Facebook group. You'll be hammered with questions from some really good people. We've got a lovely little group. And there's only one more thing. One of the really tough things we deal with is funding. So seeing as how you've got done so well, I was wondering if you've got a lazy 50 grand you could throw away to help us sponsor some clients.
Yeah, if you just
it's about £3 in your money.
Exactly. Just now the pound is collapsing. That's probably like
do it soon.
In the wake of Brexit, my money is worthless. I'll use that as an excuse. Yeah, blame Nigel Farage, Boris Johnson, and Brexit. If you'd asked me 4 months ago before Brexit, I would have given it to you like it was pennies. Sadly, now all my currency is in a wheelbarrow. It's like Zimbabwe in 2008. It's just over in Britain. What can I say?
Well, you're a wonderful, beautiful man doing beautiful work. It's honestly, it's mind-blowing what you're doing. It's I'm probably sounding a bit, but it's how I see it. It's how I call it how I see it. If you do get down here to see your uncle and one of the hairdressers in Auckland, there's 4 million of them. We have this lovely banter between Wellington and Auckland, a bit like America, Canadian, just how it goes. Actually, one more question. Donald Trump in the debates was sniffing a lot. What do you reckon? Chelsea flu?
I actually think there's a really sad thing about Trump and so Donald Trump's brother, Freddie Trump, the dad was Fred Trump, the son was Freddie, died at the age of, I think he was 31, of liver failure. And you know how hard it is to use alcohol so hardly that you cause your own liver to fail at the age of 31, not alcohol poisoning, liver failure. And I think it makes sense that the same childhood that would produce someone who would be so troubled that they would drink themselves to death at the age of 31 would also produce Donald Trump, right? He's really profoundly mentally disturbed. You can really see that. There's something terribly wrong with him. I don't think he's a coke addict. I don't think that's what's happening. But I think an increasingly sick culture has turned to this sick man as its proxy, and it's a sign of how the trouble we're in, really. And I don't think it's coincidence that the parts of the US that have the biggest addiction problems are the parts that are most voting for Trump either. If I think about some of the places I've been this year, parts of Ohio, parts of New Hampshire, I think if your life is deprived of meaning, you will turn to drastic and disastrous solutions. One of those solutions might be crystal meth, the other might be Donald Trump. I don't think they're that dissimilar, actually. Probably on balance, crystal meth would be better for you. Neither of them's good.